Russia's war machine has run out of fuel and armor. With no tanks, no APCs, and no protection left, Putin's troops are being sent toward Ukrainian lines with nothing to shield them. The result is mass death. This isn't normal warfare, it's a massacre, and it's getting worse every day. Let's look at what's happening in Torit. Putin has been focused on capturing Torit for a while. The Battle of Torit began in June 2024 and has continued non-stop as Russian forces tried to seize the Ukrainian city. Slowly, Russia has been making progress. By January 2025, they had taken control of about 88% of the city, and the attacks haven't stopped. On June 11th alone, there were 20 major combat engagements on the Torit front. Russia lost all of them, along with 35 soldiers. But the key thing here is that Putin is pushing hard. He believes Torit is within reach, and on the surface, it might look like he's close. But the truth is that Russia's advance in Torit has stalled for a simple reason. They don't have any more armored vehicles to help their troops in that area. How do we know this? On July 6th, BBC Ukraine reported on comments from the Chief of Staff of Ukraine's Spala Unmanned Systems Battalion, who uses the call sign Perepel. He explained that Russia hasn't used any armored vehicles in Torit for a long time. There haven't been any visible armored attacks for about 6 weeks. Instead, Putin has gone back to using a brutal tactic that has already cost him hundreds of thousands of soldiers since the war began, so-called meat assaults. According to Perepel, these are the main form of attack now. Russian troops are sent in small groups 2 or 3 at a time toward Ukrainian lines, with almost no support. Sometimes, these desperate attacks make small gains. Perepel adds that these small groups of unarmored Russian soldiers do sometimes manage to capture dugout positions, but they don't hold them for long. Perepel and his unit usually flush them out with drones before destroying the dugouts and eliminating the troops inside. Putin's campaign in Torit has collapsed into a series of desperate grabs for territory using soldiers without armor. And the only reason he's using this tactic is because there are no armored vehicles left in Torit. Now you might be thinking, so what? Torit is just one city along a huge front line more than 700 miles long. If Russia is out of armor in Torit, that doesn't necessarily mean its forces are struggling elsewhere. Right? Not so fast. Torit is a snapshot of a much bigger issue that's now affecting Russia across the entire front. While Putin still has some armored vehicles in other regions, he's losing them so fast that his entire military is at risk of being left completely exposed. The so-called meat assaults seen in Torit are not unique. They've been used throughout the war whenever Russia runs out of equipment. And with Russia's current armored vehicle crisis, these brutal tactics might soon become Putin's only option for seizing more Ukrainian territory. David Axe certainly thinks that's where things are headed. The former Forbes military correspondent recently wrote on trench art with the headline, "Mark the date. Russia is now functionally out of armored vehicles." Axe points out that Russia has lost around 20,000 combat vehicles since the war began, meaning most Russian troops are now fighting with little to no armored protection. Instead, they're lucky if they have any armor at all, with some, like those fighting in Torit, being forced to launch assaults completely unprotected. Writing for the National Security Journal, Isaac Seitz admits that he was initially skeptical of Axe's claims, but as he read further into Axe's argument, the point became clear. Russia isn't out of armored vehicles entirely. It still has thousands it could deploy in Ukraine. The real issue is that, due to the combination of massive battlefield losses and slow vehicle production, Putin's military can no longer maintain an armored fleet big enough to achieve any meaningful breakthroughs on the front lines. Russia's vehicle losses have been staggering. While both Axe and Seitz cite an estimate around 20,000 vehicles lost, Ukraine's Ministry of Finance puts the number even higher. According to its July 9th update, Russia has lost a total of 22,969 armored fighting vehicles to more just on July 8th alone. When you factor in the reported 11,000 tanks also lost, that brings the grand total of armored vehicle losses to 33,969. Keep in mind, The war in Ukraine has now lasted approximately 41 months. That means Russia is losing armored vehicles at a rate of about 828 per month. For a time, it was able to keep up. In 2024, for instance, Russia claimed to be producing around 1,500 tanks per year, which roughly matched its annual loss of 1,400 tanks. But even then, the situation wasn't as good as it sounded. Most of those new tanks weren't fresh off assembly lines, they were old models pulled out of storage, restored, and rebuilt by cannibalizing parts from other decommissioned tanks. This near 1-to-1 replacement ratio is unsustainable in the long run, especially as the quality of replacements continues to decline. Seitz writes. He also notes that, while Russia claims to have doubled its production rates in 2025 and expects to be producing several thousand tanks annually by 2027, such claims must be taken with a grain of salt. The vast reserves of Soviet-era tanks and armored vehicles can only stretch so far. Eventually, Seitz points out, Russia is going to run out, and when that happens, the toll of attrition it's already suffering will fully catch up. Russia will shift from being a country struggling to sustain enough armored vehicles to support its Ukrainian offensives, to one experiencing the kind of an armored desperation we now see in Torrid on a regular basis. Once those reserves are gone, armored support will vanish, and Putin's military will be left relying almost exclusively on meat assaults, slow, brutal offensives with little to no momentum. There is now a visible deadline on Russia's ability to maintain the war at its current scale. NATO assessments suggest Russia can continue fighting at this level until 2027, assuming no major escalations and continued economic sacrifices. Seitz writes. But other analysts warn that, if current loss rates hold and the refurbishment of old tanks becomes unworkable, Russia could run out of usable tanks by 2026. And while the Kremlin may still be able to suppress domestic dissent and press on with the war, the costs economic, political, and military are becoming overwhelming. The takeaway is simple. Russia's armored vehicle crisis is already severe, and it's only heading in one direction from bad to worse. So, what does this mean for Russia moving forward? Let's start with the meat assaults already underway. As we said earlier, these assaults are nothing new for Putin. Even back in January 2024, CNN reported on what it described as Russia's relentless meat assaults, designed to grind down Ukraine's forces by forcing them to expend ammunition. The concept is brutally simple. Putin doesn't care about his soldiers, so he sends them in wave after wave, often unarmored, to serve as cannon fodder. The more casualties Ukraine inflicts, the more ammunition it's forced to burn through. Eventually, these Russian assaults may succeed not because of any tactical brilliance on Putin's part, but simply because he's willing to sacrifice thousands of his own troops to inch forward. Putin's disregard for the lives of his soldiers was evident as early as 2024. Nobody evacuates them. Nobody takes them away. A Ukrainian sniper operating under the codename Bess told CNN in January 2024, "It feels like people don't have a specific task. They just go and die." About 7 months later, more Ukrainian soldiers were speaking out about this brutal and dehumanizing Russian tactic. Among them was Lieutenant Colonel Anton Baev, a commander in the Karsha Brigade of Ukraine's National Guard. In July 2024, he told the BBC, "The Russians use these units in most cases purely to see where our firing equipment is located and to constantly exhaust our units. Our guys stand in positions and fight. And when 4 or 5 waves of the enemy come at you in a day, which you have to destroy without end, it's very difficult not only physically, but also psychologically